Meet the Kalash people, the most isolated tribe with shocking traditions. They were dancing while the world burned. High in the mountains, far from borders drawn by distant powers, men and women gathered in bright clothing. Wine was poured. Songs older than memory echoed between stone walls. The dead were honored openly, without fear or apology. Below them, nations fractured. Armies moved. Languages vanished. Faiths replaced one another at gunpoint. But here, nothing changed. When outsiders finally reached this valley, they expected ruins. Survivors. Traces of something lost. Instead, they found continuity. Living rituals. Living gods. Living resistance. And a question that refused to go away. How did these people survive untouched when every similar culture around them disappeared? The answer does not begin with war. It begins with geography. Long before maps named this region, before borders divided mountains into nations, this land existed as a barrier. The Hindu Kush rises sharply, without invitation. Its peaks tear into the sky. Its valleys close like fists. Its winters isolate villages for months at a time. Movement here is never easy. Even today, reaching the Kalash valleys requires hours of travel on narrow roads carved into stone. One mistake sends vehicles into rivers below. Phone signals vanish. Modern noise fades. The land itself enforces silence. And then, suddenly, color. Wooden houses stacked against cliffs. Bright red hats stitched by hand. Beaded necklaces reflecting sunlight. Laughter where none should exist. This is where the Kalash live. Not hidden by secrecy. Hidden by terrain. Only a few thousand remain. And they are surrounded, completely, by cultures that changed long ago. The Kalash are different in ways that are immediately visible and deeply unsettling to outsiders. Their religion is not Islamic. Their rituals are not modern. Their worldview does not align with the surrounding world. They drink wine openly. They celebrate fertility and nature. They dance publicly, men and women together. They bury their dead above ground, believing death is not impurity, but transition. Their lives are governed by concepts of balance, between purity and impurity, chaos and order, nature and humanity. To anthropologists, this marks one of the last surviving expressions of ancient Indo-Iranian belief systems. To extremists, it marks defiance. Difference, in this region, has never been neutral. The Kalash valleys were never isolated from history. They were surrounded by it. Persian empires expanded and collapsed nearby. Greek armies passed through the wider region. Kushan rulers built kingdoms. Traders moved goods, ideas, and beliefs through mountain passes. New religions arrived slowly, then forcefully. Over centuries, most neighboring tribes adapted. Some converted. Some merged. Some disappeared entirely. The Kalash did not. Their language endured. Their festivals endured. Their gods endured. Not because they were stronger, but because the mountains bought them time. Across the mountains lived another people, the Kafirs. They shared similar beliefs, similar rituals, similar vulnerability. In the late 19th century, that similarity became a death sentence. Abdur Rahman Khan, ruler of Afghanistan, launched a campaign of forced conversion. Villages were burned, shrines destroyed. People were given a choice: abandon their beliefs or die. The land itself was renamed. Kafiristan, land of the unbelievers, became Nuristan, the land of light. But the light followed bloodshed. Some escaped. They crossed frozen passes under fire, carried children through snow. Many did not survive. A few reached the Kalash valleys, and they brought knowledge more powerful than any weapon. They brought proof. Proof of what happens when isolation fails. From that moment on, the Kalash changed quietly. They did not build walls. They did not raise armies. They did not seek allies. They turned inward. Rituals became guarded. Outsiders were watched. Knowledge was shared carefully. Survival now depended on invisibility. Time moved differently in the valleys. While cities below modernized, Kalash life followed the rhythm of seasons. Spring brought planting and birth. Summer brought movement and grazing. Autumn brought harvest and festivals. Winter brought silence and memory. Their celebrations were not entertainment. They were continuity. Each song passed forward what history tried to erase. The 20th century brought roads, then tourists, then governments, then militants. The valleys were no longer unseen. Some visitors came with curiosity. Others came with cameras. Some came with paperwork. And some came with threats. Conversion pressure increased. Some Kalash families converted to survive. Others refused. Each conversion reduced the community. Each death removed irreplaceable knowledge. Languages do not vanish suddenly. They fade. So did the Kalash, quietly, unevenly, painfully. As violence spread in nearby regions, the Kalash recognized familiar patterns. Schools burned. Girls were silenced. Cultural symbols were erased. The Kalash responded the only way they knew how. They made their traditions louder. Festivals grew brighter. Songs were taught earlier. Children learned ritual before literacy. This was not celebration. It was defense. Identity, reinforced through repetition. But resistance invites attention, and attention brings risk. In the early 2000s, threats increased. Warnings arrived quietly. Pressure intensified. Some leaders disappeared without explanation. Then a sacred site was vandalized. Carvings smashed. Symbols defaced. It was a message. The Kalash responded by holding a festival. Music echoed through the valley while armed checkpoints stood miles away. Dancers moved beneath stars that had watched their ancestors do the same. It looked fearless, but fear was present. Because the Kalash understand one truth. If they disappear, they will not be remembered as a people. They will be remembered as an anomaly. During a routine cultural survey, researchers entered an abandoned house in a remote upper valley. Buried beneath ash and timber were objects wrapped in cloth. Old objects, carvings unlike known Kalash symbols, tools with unfamiliar markings, and a wooden tablet marked with a calendar that did not match any documented system. It suggested rituals older than recorded Kalash history. If authentic, it implied something extraordinary. That the Kalash were not just survivors of isolation. They were custodians of a belief system far older than anyone suspected. Before experts could return, the site was emptied. The objects vanished. No explanation was given. A local guide who had assisted the team later disappeared from records. No conclusions were drawn. No claims were confirmed. Only silence remained. The valley returned to its rhythms. Snow fell. Festivals continued. Songs were sung again. But the question remained. What exactly are the Kalash protecting? And why does that protection still require silence? Some cultures survive because they conquer. Some survive because they adapt. And some survive because they refuse to change, even when the world insists. The Kalash belong to the last group. And as long as they remain, history has not finished erasing its past. The disappearance was never announced. There were no sirens, no headlines, no official statement. One day, the guide walked ahead on the narrow mountain path, laughing, pointing toward distant peaks, repeating stories he had heard since childhood. The next day, he was gone. In the Kalash valleys, silence is louder than alarm bells. The elders noticed first. They always do. When a voice is missing from the morning. When footsteps do not return at dusk. When a place beside the fire stays empty. Questions were asked carefully. Because in the mountains, the wrong question can be more dangerous than the wrong answer. To outsiders, the disappearance was unconfirmed. To the Kalash, it was a message, because it had happened before. To understand why disappearances happen here, you must understand the shape of Kalash life. The valleys, Bumbaret, Rumber, and Byrer, are narrow cuts in stone. Sunlight reaches the ground late. Shadows arrive early. Winter seals the world shut. For centuries, this isolation protected the Kalash. But isolation is not the same as safety. It preserves culture, and it confines it. Every movement is visible. Every absence is noticed. Every change carries weight. When someone disappears here, it is never just one person. It is a fracture in the whole. Kalash life is governed by rules that were never written down. Clean and unclean. Inside and outside. Pure and impure. These ideas shape homes, seasons, relationships, and ritual. Certain spaces are sacred. Certain moments require separation. Birth and death are faced openly, without shame. To outsiders, these customs are misunderstood. They are called backward. They are called immoral. They are called dangerous. But for the Kalash, these rules are survival itself. They answer a question every small culture must ask. Who are we, when everyone else tells us to change? Kalash children grow up knowing a truth early. They are few, and the world beyond the mountains is many. Stories are taught before rules. Songs before explanations. Children learn not just how to live, but why staying Kalash matters. They hear about years when valleys nearly emptied, about families who left and never returned, about choices made quietly to stay alive. For generations, this knowledge shaped behavior. Avoid attention. Avoid power. Avoid politics. Smile politely. Step back. Survive. But survival becomes harder when the world refuses to look away. The road changed everything. With roads came strangers. With strangers came questions. Why do you drink wine? Why do women dance with men? Why do you refuse to convert? At first, the questions sounded curious. Then they sharpened. Government officials arrived with clipboards. NGOs arrived with promises. Missionaries arrived with books. Each said they wanted to help. Each wanted something in return. Sometimes conversion was framed as education. Sometimes as protection. Sometimes as survival. Some families accepted, not because they rejected Kalash culture, but because they feared losing their children. Every conversion was a loss, not just spiritually, mathematically. In a community this small, losing one family is losing a future. Division followed. Converted families were no longer permitted in certain rituals. Old friendships fractured. Shared songs fell silent. This was how a culture could die without violence. Slowly, quietly, politely. But violence did arrive. Nearby regions fell under extremist influence. Music was banned. Dance punished. Color erased. The Kalash embodied everything those movements opposed. Joy, visibility, female freedom. Attacks happened close enough to be heard. The government promised protection. Sometimes soldiers came. Sometimes they left. Fear does not need permanence. It only needs memory. The breaking point came during a winter festival. Snow-covered rooftops. Fires burned through the night. Drums echoed between stone walls. Elders noticed unfamiliar figures standing apart. They did not dance. They did not smile. They watched. The next morning, graffiti appeared near a sacred site. The message was not symbolic. It was direct. Change or disappear. Officials dismissed it as vandalism. The Kalash did not. They increased night watches. Men guarded paths. Children were warned not to wander. And still, they celebrated. Because to stop celebrating would mean surrender. Not long after, a cultural preservation team arrived. Officially, they were there to record Kalash traditions before they vanished. Songs, rituals, language. Preservation always sounds like protection, but it often arrives too late. The team had permits, government backing, and one Kalash guide who believed telling the story mattered. He led them beyond tourist paths, into high pastures, old shelters, places elders spoke of cautiously, places memory itself avoided. That was when they found the house. Abandoned, higher than any active village. Roof sagging under snow. No footprints leading in or out. Inside, time had stopped. Tools lay where they were last used. A loom unfinished. Ash still visible in the fire pit. No signs of struggle. No bodies. The family had not died there. They had left. Or been taken. Then came the objects. Wrapped carefully. Hidden deliberately. The tablet was the most disturbing. Wooden, darkened by age. Carved with symbols unlike modern Kalash designs. The markings did not align with known festival cycles. This suggested something unsettling. That modern Kalash tradition might be a fragment. A survival form. Something older had been lost. Or hidden. When elders saw images of the tablet, reactions were immediate. Silence. Refusal. Fear. One elder finally spoke. Some things are protected by being forgotten. The team planned to return with experts. They never did. The site was emptied overnight. Locks broken. Records gone. Objects missing. The guide disappeared. Authorities denied involvement. Questions were discouraged. And the Kalash realized something chilling. Their danger did not come only from extremists. It came from attention. Because incomplete history invites rewriting. And rewritten history invites control. The elders met in secrecy. Arguments rose. Accusations followed. Fear turned inward. That is the most dangerous stage. One elder revealed something rarely spoken. There were other sites. Hidden ones. Not sacred because they were holy, but because they were dangerous. They held evidence of beliefs that did not fit modern categories. Evidence of something erased. And once people had talked about it, then people began to disappear. Not in wars. In accidents. Illnesses. Silences. Patterns were noticed. Questions stopped. Silence saved lives. The elders made a decision. No more outsiders to old sites. No more filming without permission. No more stories beyond what was already known. The Kalash would shrink their story to survive. But the damage was done. Their name spread online. into places it had never been before. Then a message arrived, not from extremists, from inside the system. You are being watched. Stop digging. Preservation will not save you. That message frightened the elders more than threats of violence, because it meant power cared. Winter returned. Snow closed the valleys again. Fires burned low. Songs grew quieter. Children still danced, but adults watched the shadows. Because somewhere between ancient tradition and modern fear lies a truth powerful enough to make people disappear. And the Kalash are standing directly on top of it. Snow hides many things. Footprints, graves, mistakes. In the Kalash valleys, winter is not merely a season. It is a test. Roads vanish first, then signals, then help. What remains is memory, and memory is dangerous. When the warning arrived, the elders felt it before they understood it. Sleep grew lighter. Fires burned longer. Dogs barked at shadows that never moved. Men took turns standing guard, not only at sacred sites, but at homes, at paths, at silence itself. Children noticed. They always do. They asked why visitors no longer came, why cameras were banned, why songs ended early when unfamiliar figures passed nearby. No one answered clearly, because the truth was heavy. The Kalash were no longer just protecting tradition. They were protecting evidence. For generations, elders had passed down stories they called the old ways before the old ways. Stories that did not perfectly align with modern rituals. Stories of higher places, restricted seasons, laws that changed after great fear entered the valleys. These stories were never shared with outsiders, not because they were sacred, but because they were dangerous. They spoke of a time when Kalash belief was broader, less isolated, when other mountain groups shared rituals, marriages, and sacred ground. Then pressure came. From below. Armies. Fates with punishment. Demands to choose sides. The mountains did not protect everyone. Some groups vanished. Some converted. Some were erased. The Kalash survived by narrowing. Survival required change. They cut away what made them visible. They hardened boundaries. They simplified rituals. This is the part tourists never hear. Culture is not frozen. It adapts or it dies. But adaptation leaves scars. The abandoned house found by the preservation team was not random. Elders recognized the symbols immediately. They belonged to a lineage that no longer existed. A family line that once guarded seasonal sites used only during specific astronomical cycles. Cycles no longer marked on the Kalash calendar. Those sites were abandoned after a violent winter long ago. No written record remains. Only memory. And memory says people were killed for knowing too much. Not all danger came from outside. When fear grows close, communities sometimes destroy parts of themselves to survive. This truth was spoken only in whispers. The elders debated whether younger generations should ever hear it. Some believed silence had kept them alive. Others feared silence was killing them slowly. Because young Kalash were leaving, education pulled them away. Cities offered jobs. Modern life offered escape. Many did not return. Those who did came back questioning. And questions reopened doors. Behind some doors are things better left buried. Outside the valleys, silence was noticed. Researchers grew curious. Tourists posted warnings. Journalists requested access and were denied. Denial creates curiosity. Curiosity creates pressure. Government officials began asking questions. Why was access restricted? What was being hidden? Were illegal artifacts involved? The Kalash had no safe answers. Because truth would only invite more attention. And attention is not neutral. Then came the betrayal. A young Kalash man left the valley. Educated, frustrated, tired of poverty. He did not return. Weeks later, images appeared online. Carvings, ritual spaces, angles only locals knew. Someone had talked. The images spread quickly. Experts debated. Scholars speculated. Histories collided. Some argued the symbols pointed to pre-Vedic Indo-Iranian belief systems. Others suggested ritual networks once stretched across the Hindu Kush, long before modern borders. That idea terrified governments. Because borders depend on clean stories. Shared ancient identities blur them. Pressure arrived quietly. Security forces visited more often. Questioning became firmer. Officials claimed protection. Protection always comes with conditions. Elders were asked to cooperate, to open sites, to share knowledge. They refused. Refusal has consequences. School funding delayed. Medical aid slowed. Road repairs postponed. Nothing official. Nothing provable. Just enough pressure to bend a small community. Inside the valleys, tension exploded. Families argued. Elders accused youth. Youth accused elders. The tribe began to fracture. And fracture is the most dangerous stage. Then, unexpectedly, a woman spoke. She was old, older than memory itself. She requested a gathering. Men resisted. She insisted. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but the valley went still. She said the abandoned sites were not ritual spaces. They were refuges, places where children were hidden during attacks long ago. The old calendar marked danger, not celebration. The carvings were warnings, not prayers. That changed everything. If true, the symbols were not religious secrets. They were survival codes. That meant sharing them publicly could put lives at risk again. It also meant the Kalash story was not about isolation. It was about escape. The valleys were not chosen. They were the last place left. Not a people who refused to change, but a people who ran until there was nowhere left to run. Myth gives pride. Truth gives grief. And grief demands responsibility. The woman named the family of the missing guide. She said his lineage once guarded one of the refuge sites. That knowledge made him valuable and dangerous. Silence returned. The heavy kind. The implication was clear. The guide did not disappear by accident. Someone wanted what he knew, or wanted to stop him from sharing it. The valleys changed after that night. Children were sent to sleep earlier. Guards doubled. Elders stopped debating and started planning. They made a decision. They would document everything themselves. Not for outsiders. For survival. Songs recorded quietly. Stories whispered into hidden devices. Maps drawn from memory. If they disappeared, the truth would not. But memory turned into evidence. And evidence attracts power. As spring arrived and paths reopened, a stranger came. He carried no camera, only documents. He claimed to be a historian. He spoke the language, poorly, but enough. He knew names he should not know. He asked about calendars, refuges, warnings. The elders refused to speak. The man smiled and said one sentence. "You are not the only ones who remember." That was worse than a threat. 2 days later, soldiers appeared at the valley entrance. Official reason, security. Unofficial message, comply. The Kalash were trapped. Speak and become a political tool. Stay silent and fade slowly into extinction. The mountains felt less like protection, more like walls. That night, fires burned late. There was no safe path, only choices with different kinds of loss. Among the recordings was a song never sung publicly. It spoke of a final refuge, a place higher than any known site, where the last memory sleeps. Only 3 living people knew its location, and one of them had been seen speaking with officials outside the valley. When trust breaks at the top of a mountain, there is nowhere left to hide. The mountains were never silent. They only waited. Snow does not erase sound. It delays it. It presses memory into the stone and holds it there, patient, until the season changes. When the snow finally melted, the Kalash valleys felt smaller than they ever had before. Paths reopened, but freedom did not return with them. Soldiers still stood at the entrance, polite, restrained, watching. Papers were checked carefully. Questions were asked twice, sometimes 3 times, as if repetition itself might loosen truth. Everyone felt it. Something was about to end, or begin. The elders met one last time. Not publicly, not formally. They gathered at night, away from roads and light, away from places where words might travel further than intended. Fires were kept low. Voices stayed close to breath. Fear had begun to pull the community apart. This meeting was not about debate anymore. It was about survival. The song was brought out again. The forbidden one. It was not sung. Songs can travel. Instead, it was spoken, slowly, carefully, line by line, like a map drawn in air. The song described a climb beyond known grazing lands, beyond seasonal shelters, beyond even the abandoned refuge sites remembered by living elders. A place above fear. A place where memory was hidden. Not written, not carved, but lived. The elders understood something the outsiders never could. The last memory was not an object. It was people. Long ago, when pressure became unbearable, a small group climbed higher into the mountains. Not to escape forever, but to carry something forward. Knowledge, ritual, identity. They were meant to return when danger passed. They never did. Some believed they died. Some believed they chose another life. Some believed they were erased. But the song remained. And now, the song was awake. The betrayal changed everything. One of the 3 who knew the location had spoken to outsiders. Whether driven by fear, exhaustion, or hope no longer mattered. The secret was leaking. The elders faced a choice with no clean ending. If the last memory was found, it would be studied, cataloged, claimed, turned into proof, turned into property. If it was destroyed, the Kalash might survive, but hollowed. If it was left alone, it could disappear forever. The decision was not made by vote. It was made by silence. At dawn, 3 people would leave the valley. Not elders, not leaders, not those already watched. Young, strong, quiet. They would climb, not to reveal, but to witness. Because some truths must be seen before they disappear. The journey began before sunrise. No ceremony, no farewell, only footsteps on stone. Days passed, air thinned, snow returned. The world below vanished into cloud. There were no roads, no signals, only rock, ice, and memory. The mountain did not guide them. It tested them. The place described in the song was real. A narrow shelf carved into the mountain face, hidden from below, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Wind-scoured, cold, empty. At first glance, it looked like nothing. Then they noticed the signs. Fire marks, stone alignments, carvings worn smooth by time, and bones, not graves. Burials placed carefully in stone frames, all facing the same direction. No names, no markers, no ownership. This was not a village. It was a vow. The last memory was not a lost civilization. It was a choice. These people had given up family, future, and safety to keep something alive when the world tried to erase it. And what they kept was simple. Not gods, not weapons, not power. They kept stories, songs, ways of seeing the world without hatred, balance, season, respect for life and death without fear. The carvings matched no modern category, no fixed religion, no strict hierarchy, just coexistence. The 3 understood why it had to remain hidden. This truth did not belong to a nation, or a faith, or a border. It belonged to humanity before fear taught it to divide. They took nothing, no photos, no objects, because taking would turn it into evidence. And evidence invites control. They returned as quietly as they left. But silence does not erase movement. Someone noticed. When the 3 returned, the valley had changed. Soldiers were gone. Officials had left. Pressure had lifted. Too suddenly. That was worse. Because sudden quiet means decisions have already been made. News spread through channels the Kalash did not control. The region would be developed. Roads improved. Tourism expanded. Cultural heritage promoted. Protection through exposure. The oldest strategy. The elders understood immediately. The Kalash would not be destroyed. They would be preserved to death. Festivals would become performances. Rituals would become schedules. Identity would become branding. The Kalash would survive. As an image. This time, there was no argument. Only preparation. They opened some traditions. Shared stories already known. Allowed controlled access. But the deepest things were closed forever. The song was never recorded. The path was never mapped. The location was removed from living knowledge. The 3 climbers never spoke again of what they saw. Then something unexpected happened. Young Kalash began to return. Not for money. For meaning. They were tired of being explained by others. Tired of being symbols. Tired of being almost extinct. They wanted to belong to something that refused to perform. Education changed. Children learned both worlds. Festivals continued. But for themselves. The Kalash did not freeze in time. They adapted. Again. On their terms. Years passed. The missing guide was never found. No body. No answers. But his name returned to winter nights. Not as a victim. As a carrier. Someone who held knowledge when it mattered. Remembering is resistance. The world moved on. New crises. New wars. New headlines. The Kalash slipped back to the edge of attention. Not invisible, but unclaimed. High in the mountains, where no road will ever safely reach, the last memory sleeps. Not as proof. Not as history. But as reminder. That long before borders and labels, people survived by choosing balance over power. And that sometimes, the greatest act of preservation is knowing what must never be shown. The Kalash are still there. Dancing. Laughing. Burying their dead without fear. Not untouched by history, but undefeated by it. And the mountains are still watching. Waiting. For the next time the world forgets what it once was.